Elias Thorne's fingers traced over the architectural blueprints spread across his mahogany desk, his keen eyes scrutinizing every detail of the new development project. The sounds of party preparations filtered through his study door, crystal glasses clinking, servers arranging silverware, and his wife Vivian's voice directing the staff with practiced authority. 25 years. The number resonated in his mind as he made precise annotations on the blueprints. Each mark was deliberate, calculated, just like everything else in his life. The party would start in an hour, celebrating their silver anniversary. Vivian had insisted on making it a grand affair, inviting half the city's elite to witness their supposed marital bliss. A knock on his study door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Elias called out, not looking up from his work. The door opened, and Damien Dax Hayes strode in, carrying an expensive bottle of scotch. "There's the man of the hour. Still working even on your anniversary." Dax's voice carried its usual charm, masking something Elias couldn't quite place. "Dax," Elias acknowledged, finally looking up. "You're early. Couldn't let my best friend start his anniversary celebration without his favorite scotch, could I?" Dax placed the bottle on the desk, his confident smile never wavering. "Single malt, aged 25 years. Seemed appropriate." Before Elias could respond, Vivian appeared in the doorway. Her designer dress hugged her figure perfectly, her blonde hair styled immaculately. "Dax, darling, you're here already." Her voice carried a note of surprise, perhaps too much surprise. Dax's gaze lingered on Vivian a fraction too long. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Viv. You look stunning." Elias observed the exchange silently, his architect's eye for detail noting the subtle shift in Vivian's posture, the way Dax's fingers twitched slightly at his sides. Small details, nearly imperceptible, but they registered in his mind like red flags on a blueprint. "The caterers need direction about the appetizer arrangement," Vivian said, her eyes flickering between the two men. "Elias, dear, would you mind?" "Of course," Elias replied smoothly, standing from his desk. As he passed Vivian, he noticed a faint, unfamiliar cologne lingering in the air around her. Not his, certainly not hers. The party began promptly at 7. Guests filled their modernist home, admiring the carefully curated art pieces and discussing business deals over champagne. Elias played the perfect host, navigating conversations with the ease of a man accustomed to managing million-dollar negotiations. "Dad," Jada's voice cut through the ambient noise. His 17-year-old daughter stood beside him, her dark eyes, so much like his own, carrying a worried expression. "Can we talk for a minute?" Elias guided her to a quieter corner. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Jada hesitated, fidgeting with the sleeve of her dress. "Have you noticed anything weird lately?" "With Mom." "Weird how?" Elias kept his voice neutral, though his interest sharpened. "I don't know. She's been different, more distracted. And the way she and Uncle Dax." Jada stopped abruptly as Vivian's laugh rang out across the room. They both turned to see her standing unnecessarily close to Dax, her hand resting on his arm as they shared what appeared to be a private joke. "I'm sure it's nothing," Elias assured his daughter, though his mind was already calculating, analyzing. "Why don't you go check on your friends? I saw Emma and Sarah arrive earlier." Once Jada left, Elias retreated to his study under the pretense of taking a business call. He locked the door and sat at his computer, pulling up phone records, email accounts, and credit card statements. Years of business dealings had taught him the importance of keeping detailed records. Now those same skills would serve a different purpose. The first red flag appeared in a series of text messages from an unknown number, dating back 3 months. The second was a pattern of credit card charges at hotels during times Vivian had claimed to be shopping or visiting friends. The third, and most damning, was an email thread between 2 anonymous accounts, the content of which left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Elias sat back in his chair, his expression unchanged as he processed the information. The party continued outside his study, the sounds of celebration now seeming grotesque in their falsity. 25 years of marriage, built on trust and loyalty, now revealed to be as hollow as the champagne flutes tinkling in the next room. He thought about confronting them immediately, making a scene in front of all their guests. It would be satisfying, certainly, to watch their faces as their secret was exposed. But Elias Thorne hadn't become one of the city's most successful architects by acting on impulse. No, this required precision, planning, the same meticulous attention to detail he applied to his architectural projects. He began making notes in a small black notebook, his handwriting steady despite the rage building inside him. A knock on the study door interrupted his planning. "Elias," Vivian's voice called out. "The guests are asking for you. It's almost time for the toast." "Just wrapping up a call," he responded, his voice betraying nothing of what he discovered. "I'll be right there." Elias closed his laptop and tucked the notebook into his desk drawer. He straightened his tie, checked his reflection in the window, and opened the door. Vivian stood there, perfectly coiffed and smiling, the picture of a devoted wife. "Everything okay?" she asked, reaching out to adjust his tie unnecessarily. "Perfect," he replied, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to it. "Shall we?" They returned to the party, where Dax was already holding up his glass, ready to make a toast. Elias watched as his best friend spoke about loyalty, friendship, and enduring love, each word now dripping with hypocrisy. To Elias and Vivian, Dax concluded, raising his glass higher. 25 years of marriage, and many more to come. The guests echoed the sentiment, glasses clinking throughout the room. Elias raised his own glass, meeting Dax's eyes across the crowd. His friend's smile faltered slightly at whatever he saw in Elias's gaze. "Thank you all for coming," Elias addressed the crowd, his voice commanding immediate attention. 25 years ago, I made vows to honor, cherish, and protect. Those vows meant everything to me." He paused, noting how Vivian's hand tightened on her glass. "They still do." The party continued late into the night, guests gradually departing until only family remained. Jada had gone to bed, leaving Elias, Vivian, and Dax in the living room, with the remains of the celebrations scattered around them. "I should head out," Dax said, standing somewhat unsteadily. "Fantastic party, both of you. Really spectacular." "I'll walk you out," Vivian offered quickly. "No need," Elias interjected smoothly. "I'll do it. You've been on your feet all night, darling." He walked Dax to the door, maintaining casual conversation about work and their upcoming golf game. As Dax stepped outside, Elias called after him. "Dax." "Yeah. Thank you for coming tonight. For being such a good friend all these years." Elias's voice was sincere, which made the underlying threat all the more chilling. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Dax's smile wavered slightly. "Of course. What are friends for?" Elias watched him drive away, then returned to find Vivian already heading upstairs. "Going to bed?" he asked. "Exhausted," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "Coming up soon. Need to review some documents first." Back in his study, Elias opened his laptop again. He had work to do, evidence to gather, a plan to construct. The party might be over, but the real celebration was just beginning. As he typed, he allowed himself a small smile. They thought they had been careful, clever even, but they had forgotten one crucial detail. Elias Thorne never did anything halfway, including revenge. The architect in him knew that before you could build something new, you sometimes had to demolish what came before. He was prepared to tear it all down, brick by brick, until nothing remained of their perfectly constructed lies. The week following the anniversary party unfolded with the precision of an architect's blueprint. Elias maintained his routine: breakfast with Jada, meetings at the office, dinner with Vivian. But beneath this carefully constructed normalcy, he was laying the groundwork for what was to come. "Harper Investigations," the woman across from him stated, sliding her business card across his desk. Sarah Harper's reputation preceded her: discreet, thorough, and most importantly, ruthless in pursuit of the truth. "I need everything," Elias said, pushing a folder toward her. "Every meeting, every call, every hotel room. I want times, dates, photographs. Leave no stone unturned." Harper examined the initial information he'd gathered. "Your wife and best friend," she noted, her tone professional. "This won't be cheap, Mr. Thorne. Money isn't an issue. Discretion is. That's why I hired you." Harper stood, tucking the folder into her briefcase. "I'll have preliminary findings for you by the end of the week." True to her word, Harper delivered her first report 5 days later. Elias sat in his office after hours, examining the photographs and documentation with clinical detachment. The evidence was damning. Vivian and Dax entering various hotels, intimate dinners in secluded restaurants, stolen moments in parking garages. His phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Working late again. Don't forget we have dinner with the Harrisons tomorrow." Elias typed back, "Of course not. Should be home in an hour." He set the phone down, returning to Harper's report. One photo caught his attention: Vivian and Dax at the Grand Hotel. The same day, she told Jada she was helping her sister Susan move. The next morning at breakfast, Jada picked at her toast, unusually quiet. "Dad," she finally said. "Yes, sweetheart. Is everything okay? With you and Mom?" Elias lowered his newspaper, studying his daughter's worried expression. "Why do you ask?" "It's just different lately. The way you look at each other, or don't look at each other. And Mom's been acting weird. Last week, she said she was helping Aunt Susan move. But when I called Susan about borrowing her blue dress, she said she was out of town." "I'm sure there's an explanation," Elias replied carefully, making a mental note to add this information to his growing collection of evidence. "Dad, I'm not stupid. I see things. The way Mom and Uncle Dax." "Jada," Elias interrupted gently but firmly. "Let me handle this, okay? Focus on school, on your friends. Can you do that for me?" She nodded reluctantly. "Just don't let her hurt you, Dad." The interaction with Jada strengthened Elias's resolve. That evening, he met with Harper again, this time in a quiet bar downtown. "You were right about the Grand Hotel," Harper said, sliding a USB drive across the table. "They were there multiple times. I've got security footage, room service receipts, everything. But there's more." Elias raised an eyebrow. "More?" "Your friend Dax. He's been making some interesting business deals. Nothing strictly illegal, but definitely in the gray area. And my wife's involvement. She's been helping him, using your connections." "Explain." "She's been dropping your name at charity events, introducing Dax to potential investors. They've been using your reputation to facilitate some questionable real estate developments. I've included all the documentation on the drive." Elias took a slow sip of his scotch. "Keep digging. I want everything." The next few days passed in a blur of revelations. Each new piece of evidence Harper delivered was another nail in the coffin of his marriage. Elias documented everything meticulously in his black notebook, building a case that would leave no room for denial or explanation. During this time, Vivian grew bolder in her deceptions. She criticized him more openly, complained about his long hours and dedication to work. Each complaint was a thinly veiled attempt to justify her own actions. "You're never here anymore," Vivian said one evening, her voice sharp with accusation. "Always at the office, always working." "Someone has to maintain our lifestyle," he replied mildly, watching her reaction. "Those designer dresses and spa weekends don't pay for themselves." Her face flushed with anger. "Is that all you think I care about? Money?" "Not all," he said, his voice carrying a weight she missed entirely. "You seem to care quite a bit about Dax's company, too." The comment hung in the air for a moment before she recovered. "He's your best friend, Elias. Of course I care about him." "Indeed." Elias returned to his newspaper, noting how quickly she changed the subject to their upcoming social engagements. Later that night, Elias received another call from Harper. "Mr. Thorne, you need to see this immediately." 20 minutes later, he sat in her office, watching security footage from various hotels. The timestamps aligned perfectly with Vivian's supposed charity meetings and shopping trips. The audio files were even more damning. Intimate conversations, plans for future rendezvous, discussions about how to keep Elias in the dark. "There's one more thing," Harper said, pulling out a final folder. "They've been talking about taking the trip together. 2 weeks in Europe, planned for next month. They've already booked the tickets and hotels." Elias felt a cold smile spread across his face. "Perfect. This is exactly what I needed. What are you planning to do?" "Justice, Ms. Harper. Swift and absolute." He stood, gathering the evidence. "Continue monitoring them. I want to know every move they make." The next day at his office, Elias received an unexpected visit from Dax. His friend swaggered in, all fake smiles and false camaraderie. His designer suit was pristine, but his posture betrayed unease. "Elias, my man," Dax began, "been missing you at the club. How about a round of golf this weekend?" Elias looked up from his computer, his face unreadable. "Can't this weekend, Dax. Too much work to do." "All work and no play, brother. You know what they say about that." Dax perched on the edge of Elias's desk, his position intentionally casual. "Vivian mentioned you've been distant lately. Everything okay?" "Everything's exactly as it should be," Elias replied, his voice carrying a hint of steel that made Dax shift uncomfortably. "How's the Henderson development coming along?" "Good. Great, actually, thanks to you putting in a good word with the investors." "Of course. What are friends for?" After Dax left, Elias opened his notebook, adding new observations to his growing collection. The pieces were falling into place, the evidence mounting. Soon, very soon, he would be ready to act. That evening, Jada waited for Elias in his study. "Dad, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I saw Mom today. At the mall. She was with Uncle Dax." Jada's voice trembled slightly. "They didn't see me, but they were holding hands. And then they—" "I know, sweetheart," Elias said quietly. "I know everything." "What are you going to do?" Elias looked at his daughter, seeing the pain and anger in her eyes that mirrored his own. "I'm going to make sure they never hurt us again. But I need you to trust me and to let me handle this my way. Can you do that?" Jada nodded, her jaw set in determination. "Just don't let them get away with it." "Oh, they won't," Elias assured her, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "They most definitely won't." The restaurant buzzed with the quiet conversation of Seattle's elite, crystal glasses tinkling against fine china, the soft melodic notes of a grand piano floating through the air. Le Petit Jardin had been their anniversary dinner venue for 15 years. Tonight would be its last. Vivian and Dax arrived first, already sharing private jokes and intimate glances. They chose a corner table, secluded enough for their quiet conversations, but still visible to anyone who mattered in their social circle. Vivian wore a striking red dress that caught every eye in the room, while Dax sat entirely too close to her, his hand occasionally brushing against hers on the table. "Where's Elias?" Dax asked, checking his watch with faint concern. "Not like him to be late." "Probably caught up with work again," Vivian replied, rolling her eyes. "You know how he gets with his projects." "Well, his loss is my gain," Dax said softly, reaching for her hand under the table. "More time alone with you." They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't notice Elias' arrival until he was standing at the table, his presence commanding immediate attention. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene before him. "Sorry I'm late," he said smoothly, taking his seat. "Had to pick up Jada." Their daughter appeared behind him, her face a mask of forced politeness as she sat down. She couldn't quite meet her mother's eyes. "Jada, sweetheart." Vivian straightened up, quickly shifting away from Dax. I didn't know you were joining us." "Dad insisted," Jada replied coolly. "Said it was a family celebration." The waiter approached with menus and wine suggestions. Elias ordered their usual champagne, a vintage they'd shared on their 20th anniversary. Everything about him appeared normal, controlled, exactly as expected, except for the coldness in his eyes that neither Vivian nor Dax seemed to notice. "A toast," Elias announced once the champagne was poured, "to 25 years of marriage." He raised his glass, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "To loyalty, trust, and honesty." Vivian's smile faltered slightly, but she raised her glass. Dax followed suit, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. "And to friends," Elias continued, his gaze fixed on Dax. "Those who stand beside us through thick and thin, who we trust with our lives, our families." He paused, reaching into his jacket pocket. "And our secrets." The sudden change in his tone made Vivian freeze, her champagne glass halfway to her lips. Dax's confident smile began to crack at the edges. Elias pulled out his phone, tapping it once. The restaurant speaker system, usually playing soft classical music, crackled to life with a different sound. Vivian's voice, breathy and intimate, speaking words meant only for Dax's ears. "I miss you already. Last night was incredible." The color drained from Vivian's face. Dax knocked over his water glass, scrambling to silence the speakers. But Elias wasn't done. More recordings played, each more damning than the last. Their secret meetings, their plans, their mockery of Elias's trust. All of it echoed through the stunned silence of the restaurant. "That's enough," Vivian hissed, reaching for Elias's phone. "Stop this immediately." Instead of responding, Elias began laying photographs on the table, one by one. Vivian and Dax entering various hotels, their intimate dinners, their stolen kisses in parking garages. Each photo was dated, time-stamped, irrefutable evidence of their betrayal. "That's the hotel." Jada's voice cracked with emotion, pointing at one of the photos. "The one where you said you were helping Aunt Susan." Tears welled in her eyes as she turned to her mother. "You were with him the whole time." Vivian's carefully maintained facade crumbled. "Jada, sweetheart, I can explain." "Explain what, exactly?" Elias's voice was deadly quiet. "How you've been sleeping with my best friend. How you've both been lying to me for months. Or perhaps you'd like to explain the European trip you've planned for next month." Dax finally found his voice. "Elias, brother, this isn't what it looks like." "Brother." Elias's laugh was cold, devoid of any humor. "Is that what you call someone who's sleeping with your wife behind your back?" The surrounding tables had given up pretending not to notice. Some guests were openly staring, others whispering behind their hands. In one evening, Elias had destroyed the social standing Vivian had spent decades building. "How dare you?" Vivian sputtered, her voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "How dare you do this here, in front of everyone?" "How dare I?" Elias's voice remained eerily calm. "How dare I expose your affair? Your betrayal, your complete disregard for our marriage, our family." He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. "No, Vivian. The question is, how dare you?" Jada stood as well, her chair scraping against the floor. "I hate you." She spat at her mother, then turned to Dax. "Both of you. You're disgusting." "Jada, please." Vivian reached for her daughter, but Jada jerked away. "Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again." The restaurant had fallen completely silent, every eye on their table. Elias placed a hand on Jada's shoulder, gentle but firm. "Let's go home, sweetheart." "Elias, wait." Dax stood, desperation in his voice. "We can talk about this." "Talk." Elias turned back, his expression terrifying in its calmness. "We're long past talking, Dax. But don't worry, we're not done. Not by a long shot." He guided Jada toward the exit, leaving Vivian and Dax to face the judgment of their peers. As they reached the door, The maitre d' approached nervously. "Mr. Thorne, your bill." "Charge it to Mr. Hayes' account," Elias replied without breaking stride. "He and my wife have so much to celebrate, after all." The drive home was silent, broken only by Jada's occasional sniffles. Elias reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said softly. "I'm not," Jada replied, wiping her eyes. "They deserved it. They deserved worse." Elias's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Don't worry, sweetheart. This is just the beginning." When they arrived home, Jada went straight to her room. Elias made his way to his study, poured himself a glass of scotch, and sat down at his desk. He opened his laptop, checking the evening's social media activity. Already, the news was spreading through their social circle like wildfire. His phone buzzed with messages from Vivian, from Dax, from their mutual friends. He ignored them all, instead opening his black notebook and making a new entry. Phase 1 complete. Tomorrow, he would begin dismantling everything they held dear, piece by piece, until nothing remained of their perfect little affair except ruins. The following morning, Vivian arrived at Elias's office unannounced. Her designer outfit couldn't hide her disheveled state, her makeup failing to conceal sleepless nights. "You can't do this to me," she hissed, ignoring the assistant's attempts to stop her. "I'm your wife." "Not for much longer." Elias didn't look up from his work. "My lawyer will contact your lawyer, assuming you can still afford one. All my accounts are frozen. My cards don't work. The house staff won't let me in." Vivian's voice rose hysterically. "Where am I supposed to go? Perhaps Dax can help you." Elias's tone was conversational, though his eyes remained fixed on his computer, although he might be busy explaining those missing transfers to his own lawyers. Vivian's face went slack. "What missing transfers?" "Ask your lover." Elias finally met her gaze. "After all, you trusted him enough to destroy our marriage. Surely you can trust him with your money too." Clara Sterling appeared in the doorway, security guards flanking her. "Mrs. Thorne, you're in violation of the temporary restraining order. Please come with us." As the guards led Vivian away, her desperate threats echoing down the hallway, Clara turned to Elias. "The divorce papers are ready. Once we present the evidence of financial fraud, she won't get a penny." Elias nodded, already focusing on his next move. The legal battle was just the beginning. He had bigger targets in mind, and Councilman Harrison was next on his list. Councilman Richard Harrison's office occupied the top floor of City Hall, a testament to his political influence. The man himself sat behind an imposing desk, his well-fed frame wrapped in an expensive suit. "This is all very unfortunate, Elias," Harrison said, his tone carefully sympathetic. "A man of your standing, dealing with such personal troubles. But why bring it to me?" Elias placed a USB drive on the desk between them. "Because it stopped being personal when I found these records, Richard." Harrison's practiced politician's smile didn't waver. "Records. The Mountain View development wasn't the only project where Dax used my name without authorization." Elias's voice was calm, almost conversational. "He had help. Political help. Your help." The smile flickered. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact." Elias withdrew a document from his briefcase. "This is the original proposal for the Riverside Plaza project. Notice anything interesting about the zoning changes?" Harrison didn't touch the paper. "I'm a busy man, Elias. If you have concerns about zoning regulations, the dates don't match." Elias continued as if Harrison hadn't spoken. "The approval came through before the application was even filed. Impossible, unless someone in the city council fast-tracked it. Someone who received a very generous campaign contribution from a certain developer." "Politics is complicated," Harrison said carefully. "Campaign finance laws. Save it." Elias's voice hardened. "I know about the kickbacks, the shell companies, the offshore accounts. Everything." Harrison's facade cracked slightly. "What do you want?" "Originally, Nothing. I was focused on my wife and former best friend. But then I found your fingerprints all over their betrayal. Elias leaned forward. You helped Dax rise in the real estate world. Pushed through his projects. Probably knew about the affair too. How long, Richard? How long were you all laughing behind my back? Now, Elias, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. That's why you're still sitting behind that desk instead of talking to federal investigators. Elias stood. For now. Harrison's face flushed red. Are you threatening me, Thorne? Not at all. I'm giving you a choice. Resign. Quietly. Cite health concerns or family obligations. Walk away with your reputation intact. And if I refuse? Elias smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Then I release everything. Every document. Every transaction. Every corrupt deal you've ever made. Your career won't just end, Richard. It will become a cautionary tale. You're bluffing. You can't prove. Check your email. Harrison turned to his computer, clicking through his inbox. His face went pale as he opened the attachments. This is, how did you? I'm thorough. Elias moved toward the door. You have 24 hours to announce your resignation. After that, the files go public. Wait. Harrison's voice had lost its political smoothness. We can work something out. Money? A partnership? Name your price. My price? Elias's voice was ice. You helped destroy my marriage, corrupted my business relationships, and made a mockery of my trust. There isn't enough money in the world to pay that price. I'll ruin you, Harrison threatened, desperation making his voice shake. I have connections. Influence. No, Richard. You had connections. You had influence. Elias's voice carried the weight of finality. By this time tomorrow, you'll have nothing. As Elias left City Hall, his phone buzzed with a text from Clara. Harrison's lawyer reached out. He wants to make a deal. No deals, Elias replied simply, slipping his phone back into his pocket. Another message arrived moments later. This one from an unknown number, but the desperate tone was unmistakably Vivian's. Please, I have nowhere to go. All my cards are declined. My friends won't answer my calls. What am I supposed to do? Elias deleted the message without responding. There was nothing left to say. The following morning, the news broke. Councilman Richard Harrison had announced his immediate resignation, citing health concerns and the need to focus on his family. His carefully worded statement did little to quell speculation as leaked documents continued to surface, exposing a web of corruption that tied him to multiple fraudulent real estate projects. Elias watched the press conference from his office, his expression unreadable as reporters bombarded Harrison with questions. Each inquiry hit like a hammer blow. Questions about his connections to Dax Hayes, forged permits, and illicit campaign contributions. Clara entered, carrying a folder. Harrison's lawyer confirmed he's taking a plea deal. 25 years, full cooperation. He's naming names, dates, everything. And Dax, still in custody. His bail hearing was denied. She smirked. Seems the judge wasn't impressed with his last-minute attempts to flee the country. His fraud charges alone will keep him tied up in court for years. The evidence against him is overwhelming. Good, Elias said, his voice devoid of emotion. Anything else? Vivian's latest stunt. Clara pulled out a document and handed it to Elias. She's filed a motion claiming you emotionally abused her during your marriage. She's asking for spousal support. Elias raised an eyebrow, glancing at the paperwork. On what grounds? Apparently, freezing her accounts and exposing her affair count as emotional cruelty. Clara said dryly. She also claims you threatened her safety. Elias scoffed, tossing the document onto his desk. Counter with the evidence of her charity fraud and embezzlement. Make sure the judge sees those spreadsheets Jada found. She's not going to like the outcome, Clara remarked. She made her choices, Elias replied, leaning back in his chair. Now she can live with them. Detective Maxwell called later that day, his tone unusually relaxed. Just thought you'd like to know. Hayes is singing like a bird. He's giving us everything. Harrison's deals, his own schemes, even dirt on your wife. Claimed he never wanted to hurt you, by the way. Says he just got greedy. Greed makes people stupid, Detective. Nothing new there. True, Maxwell agreed. But Hayes mentioned something interesting. He says Vivian didn't just help him with the embezzlement. She introduced him to several investors under your name. Investors who trusted your reputation. I'm aware. Maxwell paused. You know, Thorne, I've been on this case long enough to know when someone's pulling the strings. Everything. The leaks, the timing, the evidence, it all points back to you. You're playing this perfectly legal, but you're also playing it perfectly, almost like you wanted this to happen. What I want, Detective, Elias replied evenly, is justice. If my actions align with the law, then I fail to see the problem. Maxwell chuckled. Fair enough. Just one last thing. Vivian's been calling the precinct, asking for protection. Says she's afraid you're going to retaliate. Care to comment? She's not worth my time, Elias said simply. But you're welcome to remind her that legal consequences are far more permanent than personal grudges. Noted. Maxwell hung up, leaving Elias to his thoughts. Later that evening, Jada sat across from her father at the dining table. She toyed with her glass of water before speaking. Mom called again. Through another number this time. She's desperate, Dad. Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he folded his napkin and placed it neatly beside his plate. What did she say? That she's sorry. That she wants to talk. That she has nowhere else to go. Jada hesitated, her voice softening. She sounded broken. Elias's gaze didn't waver. Your mother broke herself, Kyoda. The only thing she's sorry for is being caught. Do you ever regret it? Jada asked. How far you've gone? No, Elias answered without hesitation. She betrayed us, both of us. This isn't about revenge. It's about ensuring people like her and Dax face the consequences of their actions. I don't regret protecting my family. Jada nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. I get it. I just wish it didn't have to be this way. So do I, Elias admitted. But we don't always get to choose the circumstances. We only get to choose how we respond. The next day, Vivian's motion for spousal support was dismissed in court. The evidence of her fraudulent activities, combined with her financial ties to Dax, left her claims with no merit. Clara called to deliver the news. She walked out of the courthouse in tears. Clara reported. I almost felt bad for her. Don't, Elias said. She earned this. True. Clara's tone turned businesslike. With Harrison, Hayes, and Vivian all neutralized, what's next for you? Elias turned to the blueprints on his desk. The plans for a new community center, one designed to serve underprivileged neighborhoods. Rebuilding, he said simply. Clara smiled faintly. Good answer. As the call ended, Elias leaned back in his chair, the weight of the last few weeks finally beginning to lift. The betrayals had been exposed. Justice had been served. And now, for the first time in months, he could turn his attention to something constructive. Jada's voice echoed in his mind. Do you ever regret it? Elias glanced at the framed photograph on his desk, him and Jada, smiling at her high school graduation. No, he thought. He didn't regret it. Because everything he had done was for her, to protect her future and ensure no one ever underestimated the Thorne family again. Justice was never about forgiveness. It was about balance, and Elias Thorne, above all else, understood the importance of symmetry. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost deceptively so. Vivian disappeared from the social scene entirely. Reports from Clara confirmed she had moved into the modest studio apartment Elias had arranged. Attempts to contact her former friends had been met with polite but firm refusals, and her name was whispered only in hushed tones among society's elite. Dax, meanwhile, remained in custody, awaiting trial. His reputation was in shambles, and every new revelation about his fraudulent dealings further sealed his fate. The once charismatic developer, who had walked confidently into any room, now faced the grim reality of life behind bars. Harrison's resignation triggered a cascade of investigations. His plea deal ensured the FBI had everything they needed to dismantle the network of corruption he had helped build. Other council members, developers, and contractors were being subpoenaed daily, their secrets dragged into the light. Through it all, Elias maintained his routine: breakfast with Jada, meetings at the office, and quiet evenings in his study. But his focus had shifted. The blueprints for his community center had become his primary project, a personal mission to create something meaningful from the wreckage of betrayal. One evening, Jada approached him in the study, holding a manila envelope. "Dad, you need to see this." Elias looked up from his drafting table, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" "It's from Mom. She sent it through my school counselor." Elias took the envelope and opened it cautiously. Inside was a handwritten letter, the words shaky and uneven. "Elias, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need you to understand. I've lost everything. Our home, my friends, my reputation. Even Jada won't speak to me. I know I deserve this, but I can't live like this anymore. Please, if there's anything left of the man I married, help me. Just once. For old time's sake. Vivian." Elias read the letter twice, his expression unreadable. He folded it neatly and set it aside. "What are you going to do?" Jada asked, her voice cautious. "Nothing," Elias replied. "Her choices brought her here. She doesn't need my help to climb out." "Do you think she'll ever change?" "No," Elias said firmly. "People like your mother don't change. They adapt. She'll find someone else to use, someone else to manipulate, but she won't find it here." Jada nodded, her expression a mixture of sadness and understanding. Months later, the Thorn Community Center opened its doors to the public. The grand opening was attended by city officials, local leaders, and families from the surrounding neighborhoods. Elias stood at the front, addressing the crowd with quiet authority. "This center represents more than just bricks and mortar," he said. "It represents second chances, a place where people can rebuild, create, and grow. It's a testament to the idea that even after destruction, something stronger can rise." Jada stood in the crowd, her eyes shining with pride. The betrayal they had endured no longer defined them. It had been transformed into something greater. In the years that followed, the Thorn Community Center became a cornerstone of the city. Its success inspired similar projects in neighboring areas, and Elias's firm gained a reputation for socially conscious architecture. Vivian faded into obscurity, taking a series of menial jobs to survive. Her once vibrant social life was replaced by a lonely existence, her name forgotten by those she once called friends. Dax's trial ended with a guilty verdict, and he was sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Attempts to appeal were denied, and his once charming demeanor eroded under the weight of his sentence. Councilman Harrison's plea deal ensured his cooperation with investigators, but it did little to reduce his sentence. He spent the rest of his days in prison, his name a cautionary tale in political science textbooks. A decade later, Elias stood in the lobby of the community center, watching as children rushed to their after-school programs. Jada, now a successful architect, joined him, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Look at this place," she said, smiling. "It's incredible, Dad." "It's ours," Elias replied simply. Jada looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about them? Mom? Dax? Even Harrison?" "No," Elias said after a moment. "They're part of the past, and that's where they belong." Jada nodded, understanding perfectly. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "Come on, let's plan the next project." As they walked through the center, the sunlight streaming through the large glass windows, Elias felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The betrayals that had once consumed him were nothing more than distant memories. His focus was now on building, on creating something lasting and meaningful. Justice had been served, balance restored, and Elias Thorne had emerged stronger than ever. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care,